Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Intellectual Agrarian podcast, where we talk philosophy from the farm. With November here and the harvest in full tilt, and Thanksgiving within eating distance, the idea of the harvest and its full meaning has been gestating here at the Intellectual Agrarian. And so today we've got a tea time episode for you. Cicero said, "The diligent farmer plants trees of which he himself will never see the fruit." There are indeed some nut trees, ones that are very productive at that, but there are some that will rarely return the investment in the time of the person that planted them. There are often times when we plant seeds that we hope to see the fruit of, but the harvest won't happen in our lifetime. Sometimes the most important harvests are the ones from the seeds we didn't even know we were sowing. Each action we take in this world plants a seed. Depending on the action depends on what we'll harvest and where we've planted it. In our interview with Margaret Scholes, she shared how her aunt gave her old copies of the Rodale magazine, and how that was a starting point for her knowledge and interest in organics. Now Margaret is an organic inspector and the executive director of the International Organic Inspectors Association. I believe Margaret would have been successful regardless of the profession she chose to pursue, but the organic community would have been the ones to lose if she wasn't involved. That small gesture by her aunt planted a seed which is now producing a greater harvest than she could have ever imagined. Every time we step up to the plate, when we enter the field or arena, we have the opportunity to take actions that will make a difference in the lives of others. It is not a question of if we will plant seeds, but rather, what harvest will they produce when they grow? Just as there are many different types of seeds we can plant, multitudes of actions that develop interest through time, there are different fields that we can put our energies and actions into. The most basic and universal fields are these. First, there's you. Second, there's others. And lastly, there's a greater purpose. Each of these could be subdivided ad nauseum. However, for the moment, let's just look at them broadly. You, as an individual, take actions that form your character, future, and opportunities. You can build skill sets to learn how to raise the best eggplant in the world. You can learn how to cook the best eggplant in the world. You can learn how to sell eggplant better than anyone else in the world. The actions and time you take to form habits and skills allow you to do more that they are in your personal field. This is by far the closest and easiest to plant into. It is also just as easy to neglect by allowing weeds to grow. Weeds don't require extra work to bring about. They spring up naturally and grow by neglect. There are some natural parts of your character and life that can be pretty, like a wildflower. But then there's also the giant ragweed that, if left unchecked, will be a drain on your life and stunt the growth of the positive habits and crops that you've taken time to develop. Others are the people that you encounter or the actions that you take that may affect those around you. It's almost as easy to plant in these fields, except that our actions here tend to be more random. Yes, we may try to be good at all times, but there's rarely a basic plan in our minds to sow these seeds into this person's life or that person's life. Yet that isn't always a bad thing. The beauty of this is that those random acts of kindness that occur in this world, they're the ones that allow one life to make the difference in the life of another without realizing it. The caution here is to remember that whether you intend to or not, your actions and words will have consequences in the lives of those who hear you speak and watch you behave. You have no way of knowing what seeds will grow and what will fall on barren ground. Lastly, we speak of greater purpose. As we move farther from ourselves, the importance of what we do increases. Within this category, you can insert your greater purpose or agenda. For some, this is environmental activism, caring for underprivileged children, or their faith in religion. For me, it is my faith. My actions in this arena have eternal consequences. As many of you listening know, Last week, Chris Blanchard from the Farmer to Farmer podcast passed away. Through his consulting, speaking, and podcast, he was able to share information and help hundreds of thousands of people. When I was 16, I was hired to help a farm launch their farmers markets. Although I was an ambitious and mature 16-year-old, I was full of the same doubt and worry that anyone with an ounce of reflection has at the prospect of that kind of endeavor. That year, I attended the Moses Conference and was excited to see that they had set up one-on-one moments with experts if you signed up for it in advance. There was one opportunity that caught my eye: farm marketing and advice with Chris Blanchard. Now, this was before the Farmer to Farmer podcast, and when Chris was focusing on his consulting business. He was kind enough to share a half hour of his time with me to teach me a little of how he grew his business and farmers markets. Getting to talk with him, I learned a lesson I'll never forget. It wasn't even about selling. I'd gone off on a tangent topic, much like I can on this podcast, and had asked him how he had become so involved with a sustainable community. He replied that it started with volunteering, being willing to do the work no one else was, and to share his time with others. Without Chris Blanchard, I probably wouldn't be doing this podcast. His sessions and workshop at the Moses Conference were always a highlight for me and my father, as I'm sure it was for many others. I don't know if Chris realized the effect he had on my life, what just a few moments of conversation did to help start me on the path I'm on today. But it reminds me of the influence we can each have, even if we don't see it immediately. The diligent farmer plants trees of which he himself will never see the fruit. Be willing to plant seeds you won't reap the harvest of, and let's see what kind of future will grow out of that. Thank you all for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this Tea Time episode. It is in memory of Chris Blanchard. Thanks again for listening. This has been the Intellectual Agrarian podcast, reminding you to keep farming the dream.